no time to lose. So that's the 15th of the webinars in course of the PEP conference, the conference itself, which will take place next week virtually, but in Vienna. And these 3 days, Monday, today, and tomorrow, there's webinars on all kinds of topics, and ours is on mobility management and EPOMM. EPOMM standing for the European Platform on Mobility Management. And we'll have 72 slides in 75 minutes. So don't be afraid, because that's my job to be afraid, to get all these slides through. But for that, I have my bicycle bell. So you know already, if you're too long, I'll give you the bell. We'll have like 7 inputs, 3 main inputs, I should say, and 4 flashlights, we call them, on active mobility during the pandemic in EPOMM countries. Yeah, as Vienna is the host city of the PEP high-level meeting, the 5th, and also of the webinars, we will start with the Austrian example. Robert is on the line again, so I'll take him in. Just a sec, and hopefully it works this time. Yes, Robert, in full view. Very good. So just opening, and first of the 7 inputs, that is you. Oh, Robert is EPOMM president. Robert is chair of the PEP. Robert is also the head of a department in our climate protection and climate action ministry. And this department is called Active Mobility and Mobility Management. So Robert, once again, I think for the 10th or 12th time in these days, I don't know, would you be so kind to speak a few opening words? Thank you.
Thank you, Willy. I hope now it works.
Very good.
Good afternoon, everybody. While we are welcome from Vienna, nice, and before the Holy Iceman, because I know that because I'm one of them. I'm the last, the Holy Iceman, because I have my birthday on Friday when I have the briefing with, I will have the birthday party with my minister, briefing her for the event on Monday. But beside that, the weather is fine, and this is, I think, inspiring, despite the fact that you are all online and logged in somewhere. I can confirm you that it would be in Vienna perfect today. So at least that you have some ideas. Sunny, warm, ideal springtime. Why we do it this webinar on mobility management? I have to say it's very, very important, because even though we worked a lot on this issue for years, there is still an absolute overweight of approaches which focus on just technological issues or infrastructural issues, especially on the European level. And we all know, if you talk about these ambitious goals we have, the transformation, the challenges ahead of us for transforming our mobility system, then technology is only one side of the coin. It will, let's say, make half of the solution. And the other half of the solution has to come from ourselves, from all of us, from the companies, from the cities, from the schools, from all the actors which are producing, so to say, transport every day. And that's why we need, beside all these technological issues, a clever management of the whole system. The pandemic shows that's even more important in times where a resilient system is needed, because the technology alone helps us not out of, for example, the pandemic. We all saw in the cities a big problem with a big lack of public space for those modes of transport which have been resilient during that time, walking and cycling, for example. So it's a question also of managing of urban space, managing of our mobility behavior, and also managing the various modes of transport. So this combination, nicely put together, forms mobility management. So I think we all know that's an important issue, and we should advertise it even more. I can assure you that in the Vienna Declaration, there is also a highlight, a paragraph on mobility, on managing mobility and transport demand. So that's well recognized. And of course, EPOMM itself stands for giving a high profile to mobility management also in European policy and strategies. So I hope these contributions of today are inspiring. It's let's say, the state of play of good experiences of all important member countries of EPOMM, for example. I welcome all my colleagues here, especially my Vice President, Melanie. Thanks also to the other members of the EPOMM board being ready to contribute, Joris and others. And I hope that this webinar will also give inspiring insights and additional momentum to continue advertising mobility management as the second important side of the coin. Because if you have a coin with just one side, it's useless. So you need, even if you have bitcoins, you need two sides. So it's also for cryptocurrency. So I also very pleased that from Austria we have our mobility management team here. So my collaborators, Mrs. Ehrnleitner, and also the new klimaaktiv mobil manager, Mr. Jellinek. So that he's the one who is now in charge for running the program. And I give the floor back to Willy for moderating the whole session. So I wish you good luck. I will not be here all the time, but I will try to be here because I have several other duties you can imagine during that time. So all the best for your webinar.
Thank you, Robert. I understood guilties, but I thought it might have meant duties. That's what I guess, at least. So let me explain just briefly a few functions. You have the chat, so you can ask questions in the chat, and I'll try to follow them as good as possible. I prepared a poll. We can go to that later. You see the number of people. It's now 31, so it's not too bad for an afternoon, sunny afternoon here in Vienna. And you have, of course, the possibility of translations into Russian, French, German, English. But make sure if you use the translator service that you mute all, because otherwise you'll hear the original speaker and the translator. All right. I will guide you as good as possible through the slides. I decided to more or less collect them centrally because in the forefield there were some problems sometimes, you know, that people couldn't share their slides. So I hope this works. So if you just, in your slides, just tell me next, and I'll go to the next slide in case you're a speaker. So last few words from me. What is mobility management, and why is this session called Mobility Management and EPOMM, a long runner, also in times of MaaS, also in times of digitalisation, electrification, and even a pandemic? Because mobility management has been there for a long time now, around for a while, and is very up to date, I think, just in modern times. And as you will see in the first example, klimaaktiv mobil, the Austrian mobility management program, is a real long runner. So we'll see some successes also during the COVID pandemic. We'll hear about healthy urban transport and active mobility in the context of COVID-19 by the WHO, by Nino. And we'll be presented all this and discuss all this. Mobility management, for me, it started under the term of transport demand management, really decades ago, and then was transferred to mobility management, mainly in Europe. And it has accompanied all kinds of stakeholders in Europe since quite a long time now. And as I said, just in times of pandemic and in times of all our new developments surrounding us, mobility management has its eligibility and is more relevant than ever, because it tackles all the behavioral issues that are raised by all these new technologies and kind of developments, and it operates on a human scale. So for me, mobility management is the glue between people and infrastructure, between technology and behavior, and between A and B. Okay, without further ado, I'll lead you to our first speakers, and it's a pair of speakers. It is Ehrnleitner and Reinhard Jellinek. They'll say a few words, I think, about themselves, and I will try to share your presentation now and have a go. Just a sec.
Okay. Usually it takes a second or two.
That's true.
However, I can start to introduce myself. My name is Reinhard Jellinek. I'm working in the Austrian Energy Agency, and I'm indeed Program Manager of the klimaaktiv mobil program, as Robert mentioned earlier. I think I'm not so new, as Robert said. It's now already 1.5 years, and I've followed in this position our moderator, Willy, who has been responsible for this klimaaktiv mobil initiative earlier. So it's called a long-running mobility management consultancy and support program. Despite that it is really very long-running and ongoing, I try to give an overview in a nutshell, and we will do this presentation as mentioned in 2 parts. I will present a general overview, and Iris Ehrnleitner from the Ministry of Climate Action will afterwards present some practical examples of what is going on in klimaaktiv mobil. So let's start, please.
Yep.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so klimaaktiv mobil, what is it about? It's an initiative run by the Austrian Federal Ministry for Climate Action in strong cooperation, and this is important, with Austrian Economic Chamber, with the associations of cities, of municipalities, with the federal states in Austria, and many more actors. So we think that it's very important to have a strong cooperation from public field and the private sector. So companies of the public sector are very much cooperating with businesses, and this is one of the key focus of klimaaktiv mobil. And third point, we will say it's also a role model for Europe. klimaaktiv mobil is very well established as a European best practice example and is actively contributing to the PEP program and also the EPOMM platform on mobility management, which will be presented later. Next slide, please. klimaaktiv mobil addresses very much the Austrian and also international climate targets. So it contributes directly to implementing of the current and important national strategies, the National Energy and Climate Plan, and also the Austrian government program, which was launched in the beginning of last year and is ongoing until 2024. For example, a large campaign for active mobility, active soft mobility is a key topic of this government program and is run by klimaaktiv mobil. Since last year, we also see jointly with this government program a massive budgetary increase of funding for cycling, for active mobility, also new funding options for walking measures, walking infrastructure. And it's important to say one word more for the last slide, Willy, please, that this klimaaktiv mobil funding guidelines were extended from 2020 until the end of 2031 quite recently. And this is an important factor of this mentioned longevity of the program, the long-term support and the predictability of investments in active climate-friendly mobility for Austria's cities, for municipalities, and also businesses. So we believe this long-term legal and also budgetary framework is very important for the success of klimaaktiv mobil, and we're happy to go on in the upcoming years. So the next slide will prepare you the target groups of klimaaktiv mobil. We want to motivate and support. We offer support, and this is consulting as well as financial support for Austrian cities, municipalities, and regions, also for public administrations, for businesses, companies, fleet operators, for associations, again, also tourism operators, for schools, kindergartens, youth initiatives, the educational institutions, and also for private citizens in the transformation towards active mobility, intelligent mobility management, and clean electric mobility as well. The next slide will show you the klimaaktiv portfolio, which we have for the mentioned target groups, an overview on the comprehensive approach of the klimaaktiv mobil program. It's a very much target group oriented portfolio, as you have seen, and we are for all these pillars, the 5 pillars of klimaaktiv, we have a strong focus on partnerships. 5 pillars are advisory programs, the consulting activities for businesses and cities and so on. Second pillar would be the financial support program for example, fleet conversion to electric mobility, for mobility management measures as well, for cycling and walking infrastructure built by cities and municipalities and states, for e-vehicles as mentioned, but also for electric bikes, if you have minimum 5 e-bikes, for cargo bikes, and so on. Third pillar would be information and awareness raising activities. Just one example, the large Austrian-wide campaign addressing municipalities and businesses and associations and so on to collect cycling kilometers via an app. It's called Österreich Radelt, Austria Cycles. Education and certifications, partnerships and awarding. The last point is seen on the picture on the right. The Austrian Minister of Climate Action herself awards certificates to our klimaaktiv mobil partners. And this is a very motivating factor and also leads to a lot of press coverage. So this is a key factor in building up and making partnerships a success, these public awards. So thank you. Example of the ongoing large-scale campaign for active mobility as included in the government program. We were able to get 10 times higher funds for active mobility and mobility management than in previous years. This is now 40 million euros per year. We want to implement and advance the existing Austrian cycling master plans and master plans for walking. We are starting a new action program for cycling for children. One example is to teach children about safe cycling in cycling courses for primary schools and also to motivate them to cycle. So for this rollout of the cycling courses for primary schools, we have trained in the last months almost 100 cycling trainers for children within klimaaktiv mobil education programs. We have the PEP Competence Center for Active Mobility in our portfolio, and we have also started very new mobility management for public administration with also a strong focus on active mobility. And in the picture, you see the Minister for Climate Action, who is herself a very motivated cyclist. klimaaktiv mobil on the next slide is also internationally acclaimed. A very prestigious international award was recently presented to klimaaktiv mobil at a large congress in Moscow. You see Robert Thaler, the head of the Department Active Mobility and Mobility Management, accepts the International Green Mobility Award together with City of Dresden, Russian Republic of Tatarstan, and a representative of the Abramovich Group. So it's a very international award. klimaaktiv mobil also leads important partnership in the PEP together with other member states, of course. We have a strong role in the PEP partnerships on cycling, which is presented in some of the webinars, and also in the partnership on eco-driving. For the eco-driving, there will be a webinar tomorrow at the same time than this afternoon, starting 3:30 Central European time, which will be moderated by myself. So I may invite you to join the eco-driving webinar as well. And Austrian is also a presiding country of the EPOMM platform.
That was
So
7 minutes, Reinhard. If you agended,
my last slide
continues.
Thank you. My last slide, Willie, is to invite you to the TPEP conference exhibition. Just click on the left side on the Hop-in tool, the button, and here you find the klimaaktiv mobil in the booth, in the virtual exhibition booth of klimaaktiv mobil, the brand new performance report, which has been prepared for the ministerial conference, but is already available in English and German, and very many more international exhibitions are there waiting for you. So now thank you for your attention from my part, and I will switch over to Iris from the Department of Active Mobility and Mobility Management in the Ministry. Thank you.
So I would like to continue here. Thank you, Reinhard. Hello, everybody from the sunny Vienna again. My name is Iris Ehrnleitner from the Ministry, from the Federal Ministry for Climate Action in Austria. And I am significantly involved in the design, in the strategic coordination, in the enhancement and the implementation of the klimaaktiv mobil program. So it's a pleasure for me to present you now some successes and best practices. Next slide, please. The klimaaktiv mobil offers leads to some very impressive results. Approximately 21,000 projects all over Austria are currently saving around 350 tons of CO2. And these projects have been implemented by more than 17,000 businesses and many, many municipalities, tourism organizations, and schools. Next slide, please. Thank you. And since the year 2007, this is the year when we started our funding program. We provided approximately 165 million euro financial support in mobility management, in cycling measures, and in e-mobility and alternative fuels, and thus induces around 1.2 billion euro total investments. And those climate-friendly investments saved or created around 10,700 green jobs. And next slide, please. Within these projects, more than 47,000 alternative vehicles have been supported, and including nearly 45,000 e-vehicles. And next one, please. And here you can see some example that all our efforts have been successful. This is the statistics of new car registrations in Austria, and you can observe the enormous increase of battery electric vehicles within the last years. But beside all these figures, I would like to mention especially two kinds of green deals with the effect to increase our public and our national fundings. First of all, in the year 2017, we launched for the first time a promotional package for an intensive rollout of e-mobility in Austria, together with the vehicle industry, the so-called e-mobility offensive, in a kind of a public-private partnership. The core element of this partnership, of this commitment, is the common financial support for electric vehicles. And the second partnership I would like to mention, we have, no, last one, please. Thank you. We have been successful in integrating our klimaaktiv mobil funding program in the national program for the rural development, with the effect to co-finance our national projects in rural areas by the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. And right now we are working intensive to encourage the possibility for this co-financing projects again in the new period and under the new specifications and the new architecture of the common agricultural policy. So, next one, please. Well, Reinhard mentioned it already, the national legal fundament of all this financial support is the klimaaktiv mobil guideline. And last year, in the year 2020, it was especially my greatest challenge to redesign and to enlarge those guidelines in agreement with our Ministry of Finance. So at the beginning of this year, 2021, after a very long process of negotiating, we have been very happy to receive the approval for the new guideline, which is valid until 2031 now, which includes the possibility to support active mobility, and what is completely new, the possibility to support infrastructure for walking now, and which enables us to challenge these public investments, this public support in green economic recovery, especially now during and also after the COVID pandemic. So next one, please. Finally, some few best practices. Especially, I want to mention a partnership with the federal state of Vorarlberg. It's an agreement to expand the cycling infrastructure in Vorarlberg, and the implementation of the first 3 major fast cycling routes is already on track. And in addition to this partnership, we have been formed already partnerships with Vienna, with Salzburg and Carinthia. Next one, please. This is an example for a fleet conversion to 11 new electric buses implemented by the Transport Association for the Austrian Eastern regions. It's combined with the required e-charging infrastructure. Then the next slide, please. Next one is the Austrian Postal Service is CO2 neutral on the way. They are operating the largest e-fleet in Austria, which includes over 2,000 e-vehicles now. And last but not least, I think one example. Next one, please, Willi. Yes. The Salzburg airport relies on e-mobility too, with electric buses, with electric cleaning vehicles, passenger stairways, mobile baggage belt, and so on. And all those examples contribute to our green mobility future. So next one, please, Willi. So I'm absolutely in time, I think. The lessons we learned is that the promotion of clean and climate-friendly and active mobility is definitely a win-win situation for everybody of us, for our health. And so I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Reinhard. Yeah, you're almost in time. It's only 17 minutes. Never mind. Thanks for, again, having an insight in the Austrian klimaaktiv mobil. And without much further ado, we would go to EPOMM, which is now European mobility platform, mobility management platform. And as Robert mentioned, Vice President Melanie Schade from Germany will give us an overview of EPOMM in a nutshell. And I will give you your presentation. All right. So, Melanie,
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Willy. Yeah, like he said, my name is Melanie Schade. I'm the Vice President of EPOMM, and I'm going to give you a brief presentation on EPOMM in a nutshell, but also talk about mobility management and the pandemic. So next slide, please. Who is EPOMM? So EPOMM is the European Platform on Mobility Management, which is a network of governments in European countries that are engaged in mobility management. So these countries are represented by ministries that are responsible for mobility management in the countries. And EPOMM is organized as an international non-profit organization with seat in Leuven, Belgium. Next slide, please. So the goals of EPOMM. Like Robert said in his introduction already, so EPOMM is bringing mobility management to the European agenda. We are supporting and trying to establish mobility management on the European level and also on our respective national levels. So we've been working with the European Commission, and EPOMM also has, for example, recently submitted to an input to the European Green Deal. So we have a lot of work on the European level. We are promoting mobility management also on our national levels, and with our networking activities, we are also engaging a lot of different parties in mobility management. So for example, the biggest event is the ECOMM, the European Conference on Mobility Management, which is a yearly conference where a lot of stakeholders and different governments and organizations participate. We are also having a network of national focal points. So every EPOMM member country has a national focal point to help communicate good examples from Europe to the national level, but also from the national level to the EPOMM. And also we have networking activities amongst each other and learn from each other. So for example, we have published a strategy book on mobility management recently, where we looked at the different national approaches in EPOMM member countries on mobility management. And we also have a newsletter with interesting e-updates and fact sheets on different themes on mobility management on our website. So the question also was, how can mobility management help to benefit from the pandemic and beyond? Next slide. So mobility management and the COVID-19 pandemic. As we all know, people and persons have a mobility biography. So everybody lives through different cycles in their lives. And in research, we see that there are some classical changes during a lifetime where mobility behavior changes and can be influenced, which is a move, moving to a different job, starting education, founding a family. So these are disruptive events where people often break their routine and start to think about new mobility. So what we've seen with the pandemic now is that there was a sudden change for everyone, because the world basically came to a halt, and then all of a sudden people didn't travel so much and didn't have as much need to travel. And also patterns were rethought of. So the pandemic, how bad it is, but it's a chance to rethink and change mobility behavior. The next slide. So I looked at 5 typical goals of, or main goals of mobility management and how it was affected by the pandemic. So for example, increasing share of cycling. I think in most of European countries, we have seen an increase in the share of cycling and in parts improvement of cycling infrastructure. So there has been a spark, and a lot of more people are using bicycles. Same in increase share of walking. So it has been a general increase in walking, and also a discussion on the quality of the public realm. So how can the public spaces be more inviting for active mobility? We have seen a huge reduction of commuting, because a lot of people working in home office and also business travel has in some parts of the pandemic been totally replaced by video conferences. So there was a huge reduction of business travel. There also has been some negative trends in respective to mobility management. So one goal is also reducing commercial traffic. This has increased. We have seen a lot of more deliveries or for online purchases or even food delivery. But like a grain of salt is that we have seen also an increased use of cargo bikes and electric vehicles for deliveries. And then we would like to see an increase of share of public transportation, but I think also in most countries, we have seen a huge reduction of the share of public transportation due to health concerns. And next slide, please. So what are the opportunities for mobility management? So I think the opportunity is to make some of the trends we have seen permanent. So the increase in share of cycling, walking, and also reduction of need for commuting and business travel. I think these are all trends that can be built upon. And also we have seen some of the trends were good trends in the past have been reversed. So a lot of people who were using the public transportation, some now use the car again. So I think there's a lot of to be done to make public transportation more an option again. So I think overall, mobility management has a very important role to help to benefit from some of the positive trends in mobility management we have seen during the pandemic, and also to help to mitigate and reduce the negative trends we have seen in terms of transportation. So this is my overview and introduction to EPOMM.
Thank you, Melanie. So now everybody knows, who would not have known probably. If you want, you can try the poll. And the simple question is, do you know mobility management in practice as a concept to work day-by-day basis? But it's a simple yes or no. So please be so kind, all our participants, and take part in our poll. Well, what is the PEP? The PEP stands for Transport, Health, Environment, Pan-European Program. And the two factors, transport and health, to bring them together, and also the environment, but now in our presentation, mainly transport and health. That's, amongst others, the role of the WHO, so the World Health Organization. And I'm very happy to have Nino with us, who will give you her insights on supporting healthy urban transport and mobility in the context of COVID-19. Nino, floor is yours, and let me just check your presentation.
Thank you very much, really. And good afternoon, everybody. And thanks very much for inviting us to this webinar. My name is Nino, and I'm working for the WHO. And I will tell you why we are interested, why WHO is interested in general in transport issues. I'm working for the European Center for Environment and Health. It's the center of the WHO. We are based in Bonn, and we are part of the PEP Secretariat. So together with the environment and transport sector from the UNEC, we are working to make transport more sustainable and more healthier. So let me start in general, as I said, why we are so much concerned. in general, addressing environment and health issues is a priority for the WHO, both on the regional and global level. And there is a very obvious reason for that. Only in the European region, environmental risk factors are estimated to cause at least 1.4 million deaths per year. And approximately half of these are attributable to the air pollution. So we lose more than 500,000 people every year in the European region due to the air pollution. So the message is very clear. The air pollution is the major environmental risk to health. Of course, in the low and medium income countries of the region, the situation is more difficult and people are more affected than in the high income countries, but still air pollution is a common problem of the region. And of course, it has very concrete impact on the non-communicable diseases. This is our concern because today more than 70% of all deaths are due to the non-communicable diseases. And in fact, NCDs are the main killers. We know and we understand, of course, that these outcomes, these very sad outcomes, depend to a very large extent on decisions that are made far from the health sectors. And of course, transport and urban policies play a very important role in shaping the health for the better or for the worse. And it's in our hands which direction we will give it. So road traffic injuries, it's a very serious problem. Even though European region is doing relatively better in compare with the other regions, we still lose 85,000 people every year due to the road traffic injuries. And the most sad aspect of it is that, in fact, these traffic injuries are the main cause of death for children and very young people from 5 to 29 years old. So both NCDs and road traffic injuries are not just public health problem, but it really has very serious socio-economic consequences. And in fact, most of these deaths can be, they are preventable. So the transport has another impact. It's greenhouse gas emissions, noise, land taking, biodiversity fragmentation, traffic congestion, and reduced opportunity for physical activity. And this is for us another issue, physical activity, the lack of physical activity. In the European region, in the 53 countries of the WHO Europe, 1 million people die every year due to the physical inactivity. So the next slide, yes, thank you. We mentioned the negative sides of the transport, but at the same time, there are tremendous positive effects, or they can be, from the if we use green and healthy transport, and they can have very positive effect on the on people's health. There are studies, lots of studies illustrating that regular physical activity prevents very concrete diseases such as hypertension, overweight, obesity, different kind of mental health, and even dementia, or delay the beginning of dementia. So why people are not physically active? There are many studies who say that, which say that people say they simply don't have enough time for that. They can't exercise regularly because they are too busy. And that's why we think that integrating active mobility as means of transportations in a daily life, it's a very promising and it's very effective way to be physically active and to become healthier. So besides the pure health effects, active mobility can have a positive effect on the reduction of air pollution, on environment in general. on the greenhouse gas emissions, reduce congestions, reduce more expensive infrastructure for cars. It's also very, it takes more and more space from us. Active mobility improves accessibility and even intergenerational solidarity. So we believe that active mobility can make people healthier and even happier. So this, what you see here, these are the objectives of the PEP, to shift from today's reality to the reality when the majority of people will use human-powered mobility and public transport and less private cars. So next slide, please. Now about the pandemic and this period. We always promoted active mobility as one of the effective tools that we have as a tool for societal public health. But during the pandemic, we saw active mobility from the different perspective. In fact, walking and cycling was the only possibility left for people to be physically active. And last year, when cities around the world started introducing a broad range of different measures to limit physical contacts and in order to prevent and slow down the COVID-19 pandemic, many people still had to move around. So in April last year, just in 1 month after the pandemic was announced, we issued this information sheet providing tips for moving around safely. And the strong focus was on active mobility. The next slide, please. Then in summer, through the PEP, we received lots of requests from the member states to provide them. It was already the period when the pandemic was somehow, the COVID situation was improving and people were easing, the countries were easing the lockdown measures. And we were requested to come up with concrete, specific recommendations how to ensure that people are moving around safely. That's when we worked on this technical guidance, and we based on the WHO existing WHO guidance on physical distancing and hygiene measures, and we brought it to the transport sectors, how this existing guidance could be implemented in the transport sector. So it specifies measures to be done to guarantee health and safety of travelers and also transport workers. And these measures should be implemented by national and local governments, by the transport operators and by commuters. So this document points out that governments at all levels, they have important role in maintaining the trust of users while providing safe and efficient public transport. So as Melanie mentioned, it's a serious problem that the public transport really lost its trust, and the public transport that was promoted by us for years suddenly was under a serious risk because people did not trust. So promoting active mobility could also help the public transport, because it could also reduce this pressure on the public transport. So the government also can, of course, play a key role in creating the policy framework for promoting safe walking and cycling. And thanks, Willy, for moving to the next slide. This is the manifesto. In May last year, WHO published this manifesto for a healthy and green recovery. And it has 6 policy prescriptions and more than 80 specific actions to protect nature, to invest in water and sanitation, clean energy, promote sustainable food systems, and to build healthier cities. Where we see very much our role to promote again active mobility and sustainable mobility in general. So health professionals from around the world, so it was published on the global level, they have shown their very strong support of actions to protect the environment and through that protect the health of the people. So for us, this is the recipe for healthy and green recovery and for building better new normals that leaves no one behind. And the next slide, this is a small animation that was prepared based on those technical guidances that I mentioned. And if it is possible to play it.
Let's try.
Then, yes, please, thank you. It should have sound also.
So once you didn't hear the music, but I don't know how to really manage that everybody hears it. Anyway, it's important messages.
Yes, okay. But it has nice music, and these are the infographics, and its graphics are showing these specific and concrete recommendations, what should be done, how to avoid unnecessary travel, and how to travel when it's possible by active mobility. As we always say, in Europe, we have cities where most of the trips are less than 5 kilometers. So it's very, very doable to use active mobility as a means of transportation. So these guidances, I think, are for the transition period, for the pandemic period, but in general, as it was already mentioned, the pandemic showed that active mobility should have more important role. And that's why the master plan that we are working now and that will be hopefully adopted next week will show very, very concrete steps how to implement it and how to raise the level of cycling and how to make our cities nicer, more livable, and how to make people healthier and happier. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nino. Nice picture of yours, the last one. Your own photo credits. Very good idea also. No copyright issues and everything. So before we come to our flashlights on active mobility in EPOMM countries during the pandemic, I will have to let in Joris in the moderation panel. So remove some of you. Don't be, I'm not rude. I can take you in later again. It's just that it's only possible for 9 people at the same time. So anyway, yeah, Joris is already here. Thank you. To start with, one of the EPOMM countries and active mobility during the pandemic, let's go to Portugal and let's give a welcome to Rui Velasco Martins, and I hope I pronounced it halfway correctly. Rui,
you were
yours, and
really.
I'll give you your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, here you go.
Oh, hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Willie. It is nice to have the opportunity to share a little bit on the Portuguese experience with active mobility in times of pandemic. And next slide. If you see, we all know that COVID-19, well, it introduced serious movement restrictions. But when we start looking at the numbers and analyzing the change in movement patterns, you can see some curious patterns. In these graphs, you can see the report of the situation in Portugal in November 2020, so around 6 months ago. And you can see that parks and retail and leisure sites were have a severe reduction of movement, but it was a more severe reduction than when you look at the sites of grocery stores and pharmacies. And this sounds quite logical because people were cutting down on external non-essential activities. Next slides, please. But if you start looking at some other graphs, you see that there was a reduction on workplace areas, but that reduction was only around 24%. And in workplace areas, residential areas, of course, were registering higher mobility levels. But when you look at the downgrade that you had in the movement around workplaces, and when you look at the reduction in movement in public transport stations, you see public transport stations were down by nearly 2/3, 62%. So this hints to something that my colleagues have previously mentioned on their presentations. It's that the people were still moving around in cities, was using less public transportation and probably using more their private vehicles instead. Next slide, please. In this slide, you can see the effects of COVID-19 on transport greenhouse emission gases during the first wave back in the spring and summer of 2020, so almost 1 year ago. And if you look at it, you can see that greenhouse gas emissions in navigation registered some decline, but remain steadily below average. And when you look at aviation, you see there's a fall by more than 90% on April and May. And then it started to increasing during the summer months, but remained at very low levels. This largely means that freight, which is mainly transport by navigation, was still moving around, but passengers were not traveling internationally. So you can see the reduction in aviation. But when you look at road transport, you can see a high reduction on greenhouse gas emissions when the coronavirus movement started in March and April. But then you see a fast recovery that brings road emissions to a near average value. Again, this hints at higher levels of private vehicle utilization. So in the past few years, Portugal has been trying to achieve a more balanced use of private vehicles, promoting public transportation and active mobility as healthier and more sustainable mobility solutions. But now the population safety concerns on the usage of public transport seem to be again reinforcing the usage of private vehicle. Next slide, please. So active mobility was quickly identified as a solution to address the mobility safety concerns of the population. Here you can see a graph which represents the number of cyclists registered by a counter located on Lisbon Central Business District since 2016. Although the population on streets diminished during the last year, you can see that last year the number of bikes has continued to increase. And as you can see, the highest values were registered very recently on the most recent months, with March 2021 rising to the highest value on record, with more than 50,000 passages registered by this bike counter. Next slide, please. So this increase can be partially explained by the program Lisboa Ciclável, which is a program that has increased and is increasing the Lisbon cycling network. And this network was designed to connect residential areas to work and study areas. It was also designed to be fully constituted by segregated bike lanes. And these bike lanes were quickly expanded during the last year with pop-up lanes. Some of these lanes are now becoming permanent lanes in Lisbon. Next slide, please. Here you can see this is the Lisbon bicycle lanes network, and on the left image you can see the existing network. On the center image you can see the planned network. So we are still building a lot of our network, and like 5 years ago there were really few people using bicycle in the city of Lisbon because everyone said it was a hilly town, so it was difficult to use. But now you are starting you start building the network, and you start to see the people using the network. And on the right, you can see the full infrastructure that supports the use of bicycles with bike parks, the bike share docking stations. So it's a huge investment, and you can see it's not so much around the river, which are the most touristic areas, but it's mainly on the center of Lisbon, where are the main economic activities. Next slide, please. This program was also complemented by another program, which is A Rua é Sua, the street is yours. And this program intends to promote walking, and during the last year also addressed safety concerns, ensuring the recommended distancing. Within this program, sidewalks were expanded, leisure areas created on commerce, and service waiting areas. Next slide, please. To increase the space, you can see that parking spaces and transit routes were suppressed. Here you can see an example, which is the street that was recently painted blue, which is the Rua dos Bacalhoeiros, which means the Codfish Sailors Street. You cannot get a more typically Portuguese name than that. So it's downtown Lisbon, and this was a street that used to be used by cars, and that was converted. And in these streets, obstacles like flower pillars were added to prevent car access. And in some cases, the sidewalks were cleared. And in a sunny city like Lisbon, shade spaces were added for higher comfort. And in some spots, urban art interventions were added to add some inspiration moments to the daily walk. So these were the solutions. Next slide, please. And this is the way that we are managing mobility during pandemic times. And I believe that we are creating the conditions for a safe return, where active mobility will have a larger role in our cities. Well, thank you very much. And if you want to check some of these cases in person, don't forget that EPOMM will be organizing the ECOM conference in Cascais later this year in November. So check it on the EPOMM website and come visit us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rui. So for my next speakers, be as quick as Rui and everything will be fine. We are a little over time. Well, I'm looking forward to make it short for the next ECOM, which will be in Cascais. And the new date is, I think, the 24th to 26th of November this year. So see you all there. And thanks again for the impressive Portuguese examples. And I think it's Joris who will present us, and I will give you the floor.
Thanks a lot.
Joris and Cedric.
Yes. Do you hear me? Because I had
yes, perfect. Everything is fine. Yeah.
Okay. So you won't see my face, but never mind. So hi, everybody. We are now going with my colleague Cedric Boussuge, talking to you about temporary layouts for cyclists and pedestrians made in France during the COVID-19 pandemics. Those layouts were broadly displayed in order to help improve cycling and walking by taking advantage of the big plunge of car driving, especially during successive confinements. But first, let's just see together some few figures. Next slide, please.
Yep, that's my job.
Yes, please. And you do it fine. Thank you. Thanks. The slide 2 shows motor driving figures in France since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. And on the left part, you can see the first lockdown in spring 2020. This one created the greatest blackout in transportation, as it was a strict confinement of all non-essential travel and activities. Whereas the second lockdown in fall 2020 and the third lockdown in spring 2021, those two last lockdowns had a significantly lesser impact. Next slide, please. Yes. And now here are some figures that show the global increase of cycling in the last 2 years in France since between 2019 and 2021. The general rise can be seen at every moment, either weeks or during weekends, and in every place, because you can see that even in rural areas, there was a rise with cycling. And we have to say that France is a big country at the European scale, and there are no less than 40% of the French population which live in such rural areas. So a raise in those areas is something very, very positive. Next slide, please. Yes, it's now time for my colleague Cédric to show you some few but very good examples of those temporary layouts. Cédric, it's up to you.
Thanks. So during the first lockdown, many French cities took advantage of low traffic levels to redistribute public spaces. I mean, most of major big cities quickly created new temporary cycle paths in Paris, but also in medium-sized cities. We think that 500 kilometers of new temporary cycling facilities have been identified, and we think that 90% are still in place. The next slide, you can see another method was to give more space to cyclists. I mean, extending all the cycle lanes or allowing cyclists in bus lane or making safer crossroads. And in the next slide, thanks. Many cities also have also developed pedestrian facilities, big cities, but like Paris or Strasbourg or Toulouse, and they have expanded their pedestrian areas, but also their traffic calming areas. Most of these arrangements are still active, and the goal was to give more space to pedestrians, but we have seen some difficulties for people with disabilities, and there is a real challenge to make more understandable and readable this changing. And in the next slide, you can see that these pedestrian areas were sometimes temporary, 1 moment of a day or a few days in a week. And many tourist cities use this principle, like Avignon, a medium-sized town, but also in little seaside towns like Les Sables d'Olonne. And these cities are very interesting because they were not really known like good cities about active modes, but they were quite agile because they are used to welcoming many pedestrians during the summer, and they already have a stock of barrier, and there is no position about these layouts, neither political, nor shopkeepers, nor inhabitants. And another very interesting impact concerns the streets in front of school, and that began during the lockdown with marking of the ground, like nudge and playful inscription. And since September, we see more and more school streets in every town. And I think Joris will continue about the.
Thank you, Cédric. Take the stand now. Yes, alongside all those arrangements, the French government also launched the coup de pouce vélo. Coup de pouce vélo could be translated as little help for biking. And the coup de pouce vélo was a governmental mobility management set of measures with about 100 million euros of funding, and it was divided between 3 levels. The first level was a financial reward of 50 euro to every people wishing to have their bikes repaired or serviced. And this level was very successful because there was nearly 2 million of beneficiaries, and it was 6 times the number of beneficiaries initially planned. The second level was the funding of bike training courses. Previous slide, thank you. Yes, the second level was the funding of bike training courses to help people become more confident in moving themselves in public streets and public spaces with their bikes. And the third level, which was less successful, was public funding of 60% of the amount for temporary bicycle parkings. Next slide. Thanks. And so what can be learned from the French experience? And beyond the 3 themes that were already said before, 2 main lessons can be underlined. The first lesson is that the good results gotten since the last 2 years show once more the efficiency of policies based at the same time on public layouts and on mobility management back of mirrors. And the second main lesson is that the COVID-19, and more specifically the successful confinements, have created a break in the population's mobility patterns. And this has therefore created a real opportunity to act on mobility behavior change by combining transitional layouts and mobility management. Next slide. And all these feedbacks have been subject of several webinars with hundreds of local authorities and associations. Furthermore, our agency, the CEREMA, has published 2 guides on temporary layouts and is currently working on the evaluation of its recommendations. And I think that's all for us now.
That's all. Thanks a lot, and also for rushing through. It's really very interesting, and we could do webinars on each of these presentations, I would say. Do we have Jorrit with us from the Netherlands? Jorrit, are you there? If not, we'll take Melanie.
I think Jorrit is there. Sorry. Jorrit is there.
Yeah. So that's fine. That's fine. Just can't hear or. But there's the presentation.
He's waiting to be let in. There's a message in the chat.
That's quite funny because the moderation panel, I can't do anything. I will deal with this and would ask you, Melanie, if you could give your presentation on the German activities on active transport or active mobility during the pandemic and also the Jorrit problem. Thank you. So, wrong. Of course. And now here you go. Right. Is that fine?
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm giving you a presentation of some activities that have been done in Germany. So next slide, or 2 slides further, please.
Yep.
Okay. So also, I would like to start with some numbers. So like the other colleagues said, there has been quite a reduction in traffic and mobility during COVID-19. So during the first lockdown, there was a overall there was a reduction of traffic volume by 50%. Reduction in car travel during the first lockdown was about 60%, and the dramatic reduction of public transport in the first lockdown was more than 80%, but overall during the last year it was about half, 50%. The distance traveled has reduced from about 40 kilometers to 10 kilometers, so people were staying closer to where they live. And there was an increase in working from home. So in April 2020, it was about 38%, but 2 years ago, it was only 12%. Overall, like we heard from our colleagues, there was an increase in walking and cycling. So walking, about 30% of all trips were done by walking, and cycling also had quite a lot of increase. And we also saw that there was more sales in bicycles and e-bikes during the time. Next slide, please. So this is based on a survey which was done by the DLR. So the green and the blue is a reduction. So it was a question to self-assess the frequency of use of means of transport during the second lockdown in November and December. So of course, less trips were done overall, so we can see a reduction. But it's quite astonishing if you look at the red and the yellow. So there was quite an increase in walking and cycling, also car use, which we saw, and a lot of reduction in public transportation, as we heard in the other countries too. Next slide, please. So what have we done in terms of measures for pedestrians and cyclists? So there are some examples. Like in France, we also had a lot of pop-up bike lanes were used as a means, so there was less traffic on the street, and a lot of the some space on the streets could be used for bicycles. So some of them are already taken back, they're not there anymore, but there's a lot of discussion of if some of them can be made permanent. Then there have been funding programs, especially for cargo bikes, for businesses, municipalities, or charitable organizations. Those funding programs are also from all three levels of government, and it's also to support cargo bikes and e-bikes. We have seen alternative use of sidewalks and parking spaces. So there have been parklets used for outdoor spaces for restaurants and also seating areas, so that the spaces which was usually used by cars is used now for pedestrians. And also some play streets were put in place so that children could play on streets and that there's more space on streets. Sometimes the playgrounds were shut down during the lockdowns, but also some play streets were giving children more space to play. Interesting also, we have some companies offer that you can buy a job ticket during the whole year. So you basically have it for 1 year. And during the first lockdown, some of the transportation companies, they offered that to suspend the payment. That was just to help people to keep the job ticket for after and keep using public transportation. And because there was such a dramatic plunge in using public transportation, there's also a public campaign, and there's a website, Gemeinsam besser weiter, it's called in German. It's basically a public information campaign on what is being done to make public transportation safe, like with more space, more buses during rush hour, and also the requirement to wear a mask. Next slide, please. So what remains? So there's definitely a public debate about the use of space and using more space for active transportation, more space for pedestrians, space for bicycles, or also public spaces. How are they designed and how are we using them? The discussion was there before, but I think it really got a push during the pandemic. Yeah, there's also, it would be good to maintain measures to reduce traffic, like I said before, also reducing business trips and home office so that people don't have to commute that much anymore. Then there's a lot of research done. So what does COVID-19 mean for cities? So how does the post-COVID-19 city look like? So there are some pilot projects and research programs. So yeah, and I hope we can retain some of the positive effects. And that's my short, quick presentation so that Jorrit has some time to tell us about the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you. Last but not least, the Netherlands flashlight by Jorrit Niehuis. My mistake. So sorry that I didn't let you in earlier, Jorrit, but the floor is all yours. And let's have you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Willy. No problem at all. Well, I'll tell you in a couple of minutes something about the highlights of the Dutch mobility policy during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically with regard to the active mobility, but also more in general, the transport policy during this period. Next slide, please. I think generally speaking, we see three phases in this approach. I hope they will be recognizable to you all. In the early phase, you had the emphasis that was put on the message not to travel at all, if possible. So public transport was restricted to necessary traveling, so students, leisure travel, etc. was restricted. And then in the later phase, summer to end 2020, the focus was more on a selective reopening. So people could travel, but it was discussion, how can we facilitate it safely and also to reduce large numbers of travelers. And finally, now the third phase that we are in now, the focus is on how can we retain the positive mobility effects, like Melanie said in the end of the presentation, and to prevent a traffic lockdown after the Corona lockdown ends. Next slide, really, please. So some figures, I think they're a bit comparable to previous presentations about traffic and travel mobility during Corona. I think the most important note for this is the number in the numbers is that the fear in the ministry in general that during COVID-19 a lot of increase in car use would take place. And also that public transit usage has reduced quite a lot. So currently it's still half of what it used to be. So there's a real worry that in the future when traveling becomes more upcoming again, so that's yeah, there will become a great increase in car usage. Next slide, please. So then some of the examples of measures that have been taken. I think they're comparable to the previous presentations that took place mostly in the early phases of the Corona policy measures, but the focus was on safe traveling, also for pedestrians and cyclists. And this included various ways of creating physical space for pedestrians by removing objects, introducing one-way streets, also recreating car parking places for creating space for pedestrians. So I think there's some yeah, great measures to improve the physical space for pedestrians. Next slide, please. The same applies for measures for cyclists. We already have a lot of bicycle lanes in the Netherlands, of course, but especially the size of the positioning strips in front of the traffic lights was not large enough. It already wasn't large enough, but now, especially if you want to maintain the distance of 1 or 1.5 meters between cyclists, then it definitely wasn't large enough. So these were in some cases increased. Another measure was to increase green time for active travel modes, to lower the waiting time at traffic lights, both for pedestrians and cyclists. And also we started an information campaign to address specifically homeschool travel for primary schools. The goal being to prevent the increase of car use after the first lockdown of the primary schools has ended. Next slide, please. So some measures took place mostly in the second phase, so the summer to the end of 2020. We have many examples of especially local and regional governments that focused on working from home and learning from home and increasing travel modes when people did travel to the workplace. These consisted of public-private partnerships between governments, transport operators, and higher education and employees organization. So in the economic core areas, that is the areas with high volumes of workers and students, so-called Corona deals were made. And these Corona deals focused on a number of things. First, to limit the amount of traveling by working from home and learning from home altogether. Secondly, to increase the amount of cycling, specifically in areas where cycling was comparatively low. And third, to spread the working hours and the working days throughout the week. And interesting thing is that we already have many employers networks in the Netherlands. There are about a dozen of those that already focused on promoting smart traveling. But these networks are now assigned to facilitate these Corona deals. So yeah, the use of existing networks for different purposes. Next slide, please. So finally, in the current phase that we are now in, we are preparing for the life after Corona, also for mobility, and it contains the same elements as mentioned before, but now with the emphasis on the more structural nature of those measures. So how can we retain the positive mobility effects of Corona. How can we prevent complete traffic and public transport lockdown in September when the universities are reopening again, when vacation ends and people start to go to work in very large numbers. So that is the main emphasis now, but not only that on short term, also on the longer term. And yeah, some of the measures that we're making on the national level are to implement structural implementation of blended learning in higher education organizations. Also preparing some fiscal measures that support working from home even more. And finally, as governmental bodies, we also do practice what you preach by implementation of hybrid working and stimulating working from home and cycling from home to work more. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So now we made it, but we are over time. I'd invite you, everybody, to share a thought with me. What do you think of November in Portugal on the coast? To me, that sounds very good. So to discuss all these very interesting issues further, of course, use next week's 2 days conference. Get in contact with all our speakers, get in contact with EPOMM, and be our guests at the ECOM in 24th to 26th November in Cascais in Portugal. So that spares our discussion, unfortunately, but we're over time, as I said. Thanks to all my contributors. Thanks to all the people that listened in and had a view. And well, some more interesting webinars to you and 2 days conference next week with a lot of official dates and interesting sessions. Thanks a lot and have a nice evening and interesting further sessions to everybody.